The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Dry Creek, turning the main street into a ribbon of dust and heat shimmer. Eleanor Hayes stood at the window of her small dress shop, watching the townspeople hurry past without so much as a glance in her direction. 2 years had passed since Thomas died, and still they looked through her as if she were made of glass. She adjusted the display of fabric bolts, her fingers lingering on a piece of blue cotton that reminded her of happier days. Back in Tucson, before the cholera took Thomas, before the debts piled high as desert rocks, she'd been somebody, not just the pretty wife of a merchant, but Eleanor Hayes, who could make a dress that turned heads at the harvest dance. Now, in this forgotten corner of the Arizona Territory, she was merely the widow who dared to keep her chin up when good Christian women thought she ought to grovel. The bell above her door hadn't rung for paying customers in 3 days. Oh, people came in to gossip, to peer at her circumstances, to cluck their tongues at fabric they'd never buy. Mrs. Henderson had made that clear last week when she'd fingered the new calico shipment and pronounced, loud enough for the whole street to hear, that some shops attract a certain element that respectable ladies prefer to avoid. Eleanor pressed her palm against the cool glass, fighting the urge to pull down the shades and retreat to the small room behind the shop where she slept. But retreat was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with another payment due to McAllister's mercantile at month's end. Outside, James Rowan guided his horse down the dusty main street, his weathered hat pulled low against the glare. He'd been making this trip to town for supplies every 2 weeks for near on 5 years now, ever since Mary and little Beth were laid to rest in the churchyard. The routine of it grain from McAllister's, horseshoes from the smithy, coffee from the general store kept him anchored to something resembling normal life. But normal was a word that sat uneasily in his chest, like a stone he'd swallowed and couldn't quite digest. He'd noticed the dress shop on his last visit, though he'd had no cause to enter. A woman's establishment, and him with no woman to buy for. Still, something about the neat window display and the careful lettering on the sign, Hayes Fine Clothing and Alterations, spoke of pride holding firm against hard times. James understood that particular battle. He dismounted in front of McAllister's, looping his horse's reins around the hitching post. Through the mercantile window, he caught sight of old Sam McAllister bent over his ledger, pencil scratching like a chicken pecking corn. The man looked up as James entered, his face creasing into what passed for a smile. Rowan, the usual. James leaned against the counter while Sam gathered his order. The store smelled of pickle brine and tobacco, leather and lamp oil, the perfume of civilization, such as it was. Heard you had some trouble with rustlers last month, Sam ventured, wrapping James's coffee in brown paper. Nothing my men couldn't handle. James counted out coins, letting them clink on the scarred wood counter. He wasn't one for elaborating, and Sam knew it. That's good. Sam's eyes darted toward the window. Course, there's other kinds of trouble brewing in town. That Hayes woman, for instance. James followed Sam's gaze. Across the street, a cluster of women had gathered outside the dress shop, their voices carrying sharp as cactus spines on the morning air. What about her? Sam lowered his voice, though there was no one else in the store. Widow from back east somewhere. Tucson, maybe. Showed up here with barely 2 coins to rub together. Took over the old Jameson place. Pretty little thing, I'll grant you. But he shook his head. There's talk. There's always talk. James picked up his parcels. This is different. Marvin Hale, you know. Judge Hale's boy, he's been sweet on her since she arrived. Offered to pay off her debts, set her up proper. She turned him down flat. Now, what kind of woman in her position refuses help like that unless she's got other irons in the fire? James had met Marvin Hale, the kind of man who thought his father's position gave him rights to whatever caught his fancy. Maybe the kind who values her independence. Sam snorted. Independence. That's a fancy word for pride, and pride's a luxury folks like her can't afford. Mark my words, she'll come to a bad end and drag some poor fool down with her. The bell jangled as James left without responding. Outside, the cluster of women had grown. He recognized several faces: the banker's wife, the minister's sister, others who made it their business to guard the town's moral gates. Their target stood in her shop doorway, facing them with a stillness that reminded James of a deer sensing wolves. Eleanor Hayes wasn't what he'd expected. Where he'd imagined defiance, he saw dignity. Where others might see calculation in her steady gaze, he recognized the careful control of someone holding themselves together by will alone. She was younger than he'd pictured, maybe 25 or 6, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot and clothes that spoke of careful mending rather than vanity. Common decency to close up shop and move on. "Mrs. Henderson was saying, her voice pitched to Carrie, "This is a respectable town. Mrs. Hayes, we have standards." "I run a respectable business." Eleanor's voice was steady, though James caught the slight tremor in her clasped hands. "I pay my rent. I keep regular hours. I harm no one." "You harm our reputation merely by existing," another woman chimed in. "A young widow, living alone, entertaining male visitors at all hours. I have never—" Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. "The only men who enter my shop come for legitimate business. Mending, alterations." "Oh, we know all about your alterations." The banker's wife smiled, cold as winter creek water. "Marvin Hale told us all about the kind of services you offered him." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a distant wildfire. James saw Eleanor's face drain of color, saw her fingers grip the doorframe. The unfairness of it, the casual cruelty of respectable women with nothing better to do than destroy what they didn't understand, stirred something in him that had been dormant since Mary died. He'd loved his wife with the quiet certainty of a man who'd found his place in the world. Her death, and Beth's, had left him hollowed out, going through the motions of living without truly inhabiting his life. He'd thought that emptiness would last forever, preferred it to the pain of caring. But watching Eleanor Hayes stand alone against the judgment of Dry Creek, he felt an unexpected flicker of, what? Not interest, exactly. Recognition, perhaps, of one survivor spotting another across a battlefield. "Ladies!" He stepped into their line of sight, touching the brim of his hat. The effect was immediate. Conversation stuttered to a halt. Faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from surprise to calculation. James Rowan rarely spoke to anyone in town beyond the necessary pleasantries of commerce. That he would insert himself into their affairs was unprecedented. Mrs. Henderson recovered first. "Mr. Rowan, how unexpected. We were just having a word with Mrs. Hayes about community standards." "So I heard." He kept his voice neutral, but let his gaze rest on each woman in turn. "Seems to me, a person trying to make an honest living deserves encouragement, not persecution." "To us, persecution," the banker's wife bristled. "We're simply concerned citizens looking out for the moral welfare of our town. By standing outside a woman's shop and preventing customers from entering," he gestured to the empty street around them, where several people had clearly chosen to cross rather than navigate the knot of gossips. "Seems to me that's interfering with commerce. Judge Hale might have an opinion on that." The mention of the judge whose dedication to property rights and business law was legendary sent a ripple of unease through the group. "Mrs. Henderson's mouth tightened. "We have a right to express our concerns." "You do." James shifted his parcels, preparing to move on. "Just as Mrs. Hayes has a right to conduct her business without harassment. Good day, ladies." He walked away without looking back, but he could feel the weight of their stares, could hear the furious whispers that erupted in his wake. He'd just painted a target on his own back, and for what a woman he didn't know, whose troubles were none of his concern. But as he loaded his supplies onto his horse, he caught a glimpse of Eleanor Hayes through her shop window. She stood with one hand pressed to her throat, watching him with an expression of such naked gratitude and bewilderment that it stopped him cold. For a moment, their eyes met across the dusty street. Then she turned away, disappearing into the shadows of her shop, and James mounted his horse and rode out of town, the taste of dust and unfinished business bitter in his mouth. That night, alone in his ranch house with only the wind for company, James found himself thinking about dignity under fire, about the way Eleanor Hayes had held her ground even as the good women of Dry Creek tried to shame her into submission. He thought about Marvin Hale and whatever lies the boy had spread, about debts and pride and the 1,000 small cruelties that passed for righteousness in a town with nothing better to do than judge. He thought, too, about Mary, how she would have marched across that street and stood beside Eleanor Hayes. Consequences be damned. Mary had never been able to abide bullies, especially the kind who wrapped their cruelty in Bible verses and social propriety. "You can't save everyone, James," she used to tell him when his protective instincts got the better of his sense. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to save someone." The words echoed in the empty house, mixing with the creak of settling timbers and the distant howl of coyotes. James poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and stood at the window, looking out at the vast darkness of his land. 5,000 acres of good grazing, 200 head of cattle, a crew of loyal men. He'd built himself a fortress against the world's hurts. And for what? To sit alone and watch the stars wheel overhead, marking time until he joined Mary and Beth in the ground. He drained his glass and set it aside. Tomorrow he needed to check the eastern fence line, review the accounts, handle the dozen daily tasks that kept a ranch running. But something had shifted in him today. Some long frozen part beginning its painful thaw. Eleanor Hayes, with her straight spine and desperate dignity, had reminded him that there were still battles worth fighting, even if you fought them alone. Especially if you fought them alone. The moon rose late over Dry Creek, painting the desert silver and shadow. In her small room behind the shop, Eleanor sat at her mending, forcing her fingers to maintain their steady rhythm even as her mind raced. James Rowan. She'd seen him in town before. Of course, a man that solid and self-contained was hard to miss, but she'd never expected him to speak up for her, to face down the town gossips with nothing to gain and potentially much to lose. She set down her needle and rubbed her tired eyes. 2 years since Thomas died. 2 years of fighting to keep her head above water in a town that seemed determined to drown her. The other widows had families to return to, or enough money to live quietly on their husband's legacy. She had neither just a mountain of debt and a skill with needle and thread that meant nothing if no one would hire her. And now Marvin Hale spreading his poison, twisting her rejection of his advances into something sordid. She'd been foolish to refuse him so bluntly. But the thought of his soft hands and harder eyes, of what he'd expect in return for his generosity, had made her stomach turn. Better to starve with her dignity intact than live as Marvin Hale's kept woman. Though dignity, she was learning, made thin soup and poor comfort on cold nights. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping town. Somewhere out there, beyond the scattered lights and the dark bulk of the mountains, James Rowan was probably asleep in his ranch house, unaware that his small act of kindness had given her something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not for rescue, she was past believing in fairy tales, but hope that somewhere in Dry Creek there might be others who judged a person by their actions rather than gossip. Hope that she might yet carve out a life here, might prove the Mrs. Hendersons of the world wrong through sheer stubborn persistence. Hope that tomorrow the bell above her door might ring for a real customer, someone who needed a dress hemmed or a shirt mended, someone who would pay in coin rather than cruel words. It wasn't much, but in a world that seemed determined to grind her down, even the smallest kindness shone like a star in the darkness. Eleanor turned away from the window and prepared for bed. Tomorrow's struggles waiting patient as wolves beyond the circle of lamplight. But for tonight, she would hold on to the memory of a weathered rancher standing up to the town gossips, of eyes that had looked at her and seen a person rather than a problem. It would have to be enough. The market day in Dry Creek always brought crowds from the outlying farms and ranches. Wagons lined the main street, laden with produce and livestock, while vendors hawked everything from miracle tonics to mended pots. Eleanor had hoped the bustle might bring customers to her shop, but by noon, only curious glances and whispered conversations had passed her threshold. She stood arranging a display of ribbons when the commotion began outside. Through the window, she saw Constance Weatherby, wife of the territory's wealthiest cattle broker, holding court near the fountain. The woman's voice carried like a bell across the square. "I simply cannot understand how some people have the audacity to show their faces among decent folk." Constance's gaze fixed deliberately on Eleanor's shop, especially when they owe half the town money. Eleanor's hand stilled on the ribbons. She recognized the setup. Constance never acted without an audience, and market day provided the largest one possible. "Why, just last week," Constance continued, her voice rising to ensure everyone could hear. "Poor Mr. McAllister mentioned that certain individuals haven't paid their accounts in months, yet somehow they managed to afford new fabric shipments. It makes one wonder what arrangements have been made behind closed doors." The crowd stirred, heads turning toward Eleanor's shop. She felt the familiar heat of humiliation creep up her neck but forced herself to remain still. Any reaction would only feed the spectacle. "And Marvin Hale," Constance pressed on. "Such a respectable young man, offering Christian charity to help a widow in need. Only to be rejected, though I hear she wasn't so quick to reject his private visits." That was a lie. Marvin had come to her shop exactly twice, once to proposition her with his offensive offer of protection, and once to threaten consequences when she refused. But the truth mattered little when gossip tasted sweeter. Eleanor moved to the door, her hand on the handle. She could retreat, hide in the back room until the crowd dispersed. It would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. Instead, she stepped outside. The square seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor walked steadily toward the fountain, her chin raised despite the tremor in her stomach. Faces she recognized, customers from better days. Women she'd tried to befriend watched with expressions ranging from pity to cruel anticipation. "Mrs. Weatherby." Eleanor's voice came out steadier than she felt. "If you have concerns about my business practices, perhaps you'd care to discuss them directly rather than entertaining the market with tales." Constance's eyes glittered with malicious delight. "Oh, my dear Mrs. Hayes, I wouldn't dream of discussing your business practices in polite company. Though I must say, your creditors might have opinions about a woman who spends money she doesn't have. Every shipment I receive is paid for with my own earnings," Eleanor said quietly. "My debts to Mr. McAllister are for my late husband's medical expenses, which I'm paying down as I can. Unless you're suggesting I should have let Thomas die without care." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces showed sympathy, but Constance wasn't finished. "How noble. Yet Marvin tells quite a different story about your earnings. Something about private fittings after dark special alterations that require such personal attention." The accusation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Around her, the crowd pressed closer, eager for scandal. She saw Jake Morton from the livery stable grinning, Mrs. Pritchard clutching her parcels with shocked delight, even Reverend Doyle peering from the church steps with an expression of pious concern. This was the moment from the gossip's dreams the fallen woman exposed, shamed before the entire town. Eleanor felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. She would not give them that satisfaction. "That's enough." The deep voice cut through the crowd's murmur like a knife. James Rowan stood at the edge of the square, his presence commanding attention despite his dusty work clothes and unhurried manner. He walked forward, the crowd parting before him, until he stood between Eleanor and Constance. Mr. Rowan." Constance's confidence faltered slightly. The Rowan Ranch bought more supplies than any 3 other operations combined. Even she couldn't afford to alienate him completely. We were just... I heard what you were doing. His voice remained level, but Eleanor caught the steel underneath. Spreading lies about a woman trying to make an honest living. Lies. Marvin Hale pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger or drink. I've told nothing but the truth about this woman's character. James turned to face him, slowly, and something in his expression made Marvin take a half-step back. That's so, then you won't mind repeating these truths directly. What exactly are you claiming Mrs. Hayes did? Marvin's jaw worked. Around them, the crowd leaned in, sensing drama. She led me on, made promises. A man has certain expectations when a woman accepts his attention. Did she accept your attention? James asked mildly. She allowed me to visit her establishment. During business hours? What does that matter? It matters because you're suggesting something improper occurred. So I'm asking, did Mrs. Hayes ever receive you outside of normal business hours? Marvin's face darkened. Once, in the evening. By invitation. I don't need an invitation to... You showed up uninvited at a woman's shop after dark. James's voice remained calm, but the implications hung heavy. And when you were there, what happened? That's between Mrs. Hayes and myself. Eleanor found her voice. No, Mr. Hale, you've made it the town's business with your stories. She faced the crowd, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she had. Mr. Hale came to my shop one evening. Yes, uninvited and unwelcome. He offered to pay my debts in exchange for becoming his companion. When I refused, he became angry. He said I'd regret spurning him, that he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of woman I really was. Lies, Marvin sputtered. You can't prove... I can... A new voice joined the fray. Old Sam McAllister pushed through the crowd, his ledger clutched in his hands. Been holding my tongue too long. That boy came into my store the very next day, asking about Mrs. Hayes's debts. Wanted to know the exact amounts. Said he was planning to teach her a lesson about pride. I got it right here in my notes. The tide began to turn. Whispers shifted direction. Glances turned speculative. Constance Weatherby tried to salvage the situation. Nevertheless, a young widow living alone, entertaining men, like she entertained me last Tuesday. Everyone turned to stare at Walter Green, the elderly tailor from the next town. He stood with his wife, both of them looking amused. Came to see her work. Heard she might be competition. Walter chuckled. Found a craftswoman who puts my stitching to shame. Martha here ordered 2 dresses on the spot. If that's scandalous behavior, then I'm the Queen of England. Walter's right. Another voice misses. Chen from the boarding house, usually too mindful of her outsider status to speak publicly. Mrs. Hayes mended my best tablecloths last month. Worked miracles with fabric I thought was ruined. Any woman who works that hard for honest pay deserves respect, not slander. More voices joined in, tentative at first, then stronger. The barber's wife admitted she'd been afraid to shop there because of gossip, but Eleanor had always been kind when they'd met. A farmer's daughter revealed that Eleanor had given her sewing lessons for free when her family couldn't afford payment. James watched it all with an expression Eleanor couldn't read. When the tide had fully turned and Constance Weatherby retreated with Marvin in tow, he approached her. You all right? Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaky. Thank you. Again, I don't know why you... Because it was wrong. He glanced around the square, now returning to normal market day chaos. But this won't be the end of it. People like Marvin Hale don't give up when they're embarrassed. They get even. She knew he was right. I'll manage. I'm sure you will. He hesitated, then added, My ranch hands need new shirts for winter. Would have ordered from Denver, But if you're interested in the work—" Eleanor's pride warred with practicality. "Mr. Rowan, I appreciate what you did today, but I don't need charity." "It's not charity. My men are hard on their clothes. I need someone skilled enough to make shirts that'll last through a season of ranch work. Walter Green just vouched for your skill, unless he was lying." She searched his face for pity and found only matter-of-fact business sense. "How many shirts?" "Dozen to start. More if they hold up." It was more work than she'd had in months. "I'll need to take measurements." "I'll send the men in throughout the week." He touched his hat brim. "Good day, Mrs. Hayes." He was halfway across the square when Eleanor called after him. "Mr. Rowan, why did you really stand up for me twice now?" He turned back, considering. "My wife used to say that the measure of a place wasn't its churches or shops, but how it treated those who couldn't defend themselves. Mary would have liked you. Mrs. Hayes would have admired your spine." He left her standing there, surrounded by the remnants of a crowd that had come for a spectacle and gotten a different show entirely. Eleanor touched her cheek and found it wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. That evening, as she prepared patterns for a dozen ranch shirts, the bell above her door chimed repeatedly. Mrs. Chen brought her dining room curtains for hemming. The baker's wife ordered an apron. Even Mrs. Pritchard, who'd been so eager for scandal hours before, sidled in to inquire about having a dress let out. Eleanor worked late into the night, her fingers flying over fabric, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The battle wasn't won. She knew Marvin and Constance would regroup, find new ways to attack. But for the first time since Thomas died, she didn't feel alone. Outside her window, a lone rider passed by, heading toward the Rowan Ranch. Eleanor paused in her stitching to watch James disappear into the darkness, carrying with him the quiet strength that had turned the tide of her fortunes, at least for today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Marvin's wounded pride would demand satisfaction. Her debts still loomed. The town's judgment hadn't vanished, merely shifted. But tonight, Eleanor Hayes had orders to fill and hope to nurture, in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty since Thomas's death. James Rowan's simple decency shone like a lantern in the darkness, guiding her toward the possibility that life might hold more than mere survival. She bent back to her work, humming softly. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack a lonely sound that somehow didn't seem quite as mournful as before. The autumn wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain as James Rowan dismounted outside Eleanor's shop. It had become his habit these past weeks, stopping by on market days with some excuse or another. A torn coat that needed mending, a question about fabric for curtains he'd never hang. Small reasons that fooled no one, least of all himself. Through the window, he watched Eleanor work, her head bent over pale blue fabric that caught the afternoon light. She moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely absorbed in their craft, and James found himself lingering, reluctant to interrupt. "You planning to come in, or just admire the view?" He turned to find Doc Hartley grinning at him, medical bag in hand. The old physician had tended Mary and Beth in their final days, had closed their eyes when the fever finally won. If anyone had earned the right to speak plainly to James, it was him. "Just working up the nerve," James admitted. "Never thought I'd see the day James Rowan got nervous about visiting a dressmaker." Doc's eyes twinkled. "Course, I never thought I'd see you visiting town this often either. Must be those shirts need a lot of mending." "The boys are hard on their clothes." "Uh-huh." Doc shifted his bag. "You know, I remember another stubborn soul who took forever to admit what was plain to everyone else. Took your Mary near 6 months to get you to ask her to a dance." "That was different." "Was it?" Doc studied him shrewdly. "Well, don't wait too long this time. Life's shorter than we think, and second chances are rarer than gold in these hills." He ambled off, leaving James with uncomfortable truths rattling in his chest. The doctor was right. Of course, these visits had stopped being about business weeks ago. Somewhere between discussions of button quality and thread strength, he'd begun looking forward to Eleanor's quiet observations, her unexpected humor, the way she listened without pressing when he mentioned Mary or Beth. The bell chimed as he entered, and Eleanor looked up with a smile that made the ride to town worthwhile. "Mr. Rowan, let me guess, another mysteriously damaged shirt." "Actually, no pretense today." He removed his hat, running a hand through the hair that needed cutting. "Thought you might like to know that Sam McAllister mentioned your account." Her smile faltered. "Oh, said you've paid down near half of what you owed. In just 2 months. That's impressive. Your shirt order helped considerably." She set aside her sewing. "Though I suspect you've ordered more than any ranch actually needs. My men appreciate quality clothes. Your men, Mr. Rowan, could outfit a small army with what I've made." But her tone was fond rather than accusatory. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." It was the first time she'd offered, the first crack in the professional distance she maintained. James nodded, following her to the small sitting area she'd created in the corner of the shop. "I've been wondering," Eleanor said, pouring coffee into 2 china cups that had seen better days. "What made you start ranching? You don't strike me as someone born to it." "What makes you say that?" "The way you hold yourself. Military." "For a time, after the war. I couldn't stomach the thought of more regimented life." He accepted the cup. Noting how she'd remembered, he took it black. "Came west with Mary, bought land sight unseen. Nearly starved the first winter. But you persevered. Mary persevered. I just tried to keep up." The familiar ache came with her name, but duller now, like an old wound that only hurt in bad weather. "She could make a home anywhere. Made that ranch house feel like a palace, even when wind whistled through the walls." Eleanor's expression softened. "How long were you married?" 7 years. Would have been 12 this December." He stared into his coffee. "Beth came along the 2nd year, bright as a new penny. That one. Had her mother's laugh." "I'm sorry." "It was 5 years ago. Cholera outbreak. I was in Denver, buying cattle. By the time I got back..." He shrugged, the gesture encompassing all the things that couldn't be said. Doc Hartley did everything he could. They sat in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Eleanor finally spoke. "Thomas and I only had 2 years. We kept saying we'd have children once the business was established. Once we'd saved enough, then he got sick, and suddenly all those some days were gone." "What brought you to Dry Creek?" "Desperation, mostly." She smiled wryly. "After Thomas died, his creditors took everything in Tucson. The shop, our house, even most of my personal belongings. Mr. McAllister was the only one willing to extend credit for a new start. I think he felt sorry for me." "Sam's got a soft heart under all that gruff." "Which I've been steadily paying back, thanks to customers like you." She hesitated. "James, may I call you James?" "I'd like that." "James. Then I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." She set down her cup, meeting his eyes directly. "Are you ordering all these shirts out of pity?" "No." "Then why?" He could have deflected, made excuses about ranch needs or winter preparations. Instead, he found himself speaking truth. "Because I enjoy having a reason to come here. Because talking with you reminds me there's more to life than cattle and ledgers. Because..." He stopped, suddenly aware he was venturing into territory that might not be welcome. "Because," Eleanor prompted softly, "because you make me remember what it feels like to look forward to something." The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Eleanor's cheeks pinked, but she didn't look away. "I look forward to your visits, too. You're the first person since Thomas to talk to me like a person, rather than a problem to be solved or avoided." Eleanor. The bell above the door jangled harshly, shattering the moment. Marvin Hale stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space with immediate tension. Well. His smile held all the warmth of a snake's. How cozy. No wonder Mrs. Hayes has been able to pay her debts so quickly. James rose slowly, placing himself between Marvin and Eleanor. You need something. Hale. Just came to see how the widow's managing. Heard she's been doing quite well lately. New customers, steady business. His eyes glittered with malice. Makes a man wonder what services she's really offering. Get out. Eleanor's voice was steady despite the way her hands clenched in her skirts. You're not welcome here. Public establishment. Isn't it? Besides, I have business to discuss. Marvin pulled out a folded paper. See, my father's been reviewing some old contracts. Turns out your late husband signed a promissory note with our bank, due in full next month. Eleanor paled. That's impossible. Thomas banked with First National. Not. He needed additional funds near the end, for medical expenses. Marvin's smile widened. Didn't tell you, did he? Probably didn't want to worry you. $300, plus interest. Call it an even $400. You're lying. But James heard the doubt creeping into Eleanor's voice. Thomas had been sick for months, and medical care wasn't cheap. I feel free to have a lawyer examine the paperwork. Oh, wait, lawyers cost money too. Marvin tucked the paper back in his vest. Of course. We could work out an arrangement. I'm still willing to be generous. She said get out. James stepped forward, and Marvin backed toward the door. No need for threats. Rowan, I'm just a businessman trying to collect legitimate debts. At the door, he turned back. 1 month, Mrs. Hayes. After that, the sheriff starts seizing assets. Though looking around, I doubt you have $400 worth of anything, except perhaps personal assets. The door slammed behind him, leaving silence thick as dust. Eleanor sank into her chair, face white as the fabric she'd been sewing. He's lying, she whispered. He has to be. But James heard the uncertainty. Medical debts were desperate debts, the kind that made men sign papers they'd never ordinarily consider. I'll talk to Judge Hale. No. Eleanor straightened, steel returning to her spine. This is my problem. I won't have you fighting my battles. Eleanor. I mean it. James, I've appreciated your friendship more than you know, but I won't be any man's charity case. If this debt is real, I'll find a way to pay it. $400 in a month. I'll manage. But her voice cracked on the words. James wanted to argue, to offer the money outright, to protect her from Marvin's vindictiveness. But he recognized the pride in her stance, the same pride that had kept her going when the whole town turned against her. At least let me look into whether the debt's legitimate. No obligation. Just let me ask some questions. She hesitated, then nodded. All right, but quietly. I won't have people saying I'm using you for your influence too. He left reluctantly, his mind already turning over possibilities. The timing was too convenient. Marvin's satisfaction too complete. This smelled of manipulation, but proving it would be another matter. As he mounted his horse, he glanced back to see Eleanor in the window, shoulders straight but looking somehow smaller than before. The protective instinct that had been growing these past weeks roared to life. He'd lost Mary and Beth to an enemy he couldn't fight. He'd be damned if he'd stand by and watch Eleanor fall to one he could. That evening, James sat in his study, going through old correspondence. Somewhere in Mary's carefully kept letters, he remembered mention of Thomas Hayes. They'd met once, at a cattle buyers' association meeting. A decent man, by all accounts, who'd spoken proudly of his wife's skill with needle and thread. The lamp burned low as he searched, until finally there, a note in Mary's hand, dated 6 months before she died. Met Mrs. Thomas Hayes at the church social. Lovely woman. Talented seamstress. Ordered a dress for Beth's birthday. Thomas mentioned business has been slow, but they're managing. Such a devoted couple. James set the letter aside. Throat tight. Mary would have been appalled by how Eleanor had been treated. Would have marched down to that shop and commissioned a dozen dresses just to spite the gossips. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His foreman, Bill Tucker, stood in the doorway. Sorry to bother you, boss, but thought you should know. That Hale boy's been spreading talk in the saloons, saying some pretty ugly things about the widow Hayes. And you. What kind of things? The kind that end in gunplay if they're not addressed. Bill's weathered face was grim. The boys are ready to have a word with him, if you want. No! James stood, decision crystallizing. No violence, but Bill, I need you to do something for me, quietly. He outlined what he wanted, and Bill nodded slowly. Might take a few days. We have a month. Less, really. James moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. And Bill, see if any of the boys need new Sunday clothes, or work clothes, or anything else, missus. Hayes might be able to make... Bill grinned. Funny you should mention it. Been thinking my Martha could use a new dress, and the boys have been complaining about their worn-out gear. After Bill left, James remained at the window, planning. Marvin Hale thought he'd found the perfect trap, a way to force Eleanor into submission or ruin. But Marvin had never run a ranch, never had to think 3 seasons ahead, never learned that sometimes the best defense was patience and careful preparation. The war for Eleanor's dignity had just escalated, and James Rowan had never lost a campaign he truly committed to winning. The news spread through Dry Creek like wildfire in August grass. By morning, everyone knew about the debt Marvin Hale claimed against Eleanor Hayes. $400 a fortune for a struggling seamstress. The gossips had fresh ammunition, and they wielded it mercilessly. Eleanor discovered the vandalism when she arrived at her shop before dawn. Across her carefully painted sign, someone had smeared the words debtor and shame in what looked like axle grease. The window display she'd arranged so carefully lay in ruins, fabric scattered and torn. She stood frozen, key in hand, as the magnitude of this new assault sank in. It wasn't just the vandalism, it was the message. Someone had crept here in darkness to destroy what little she'd built, to remind her that the town's judgment hadn't softened, merely waited for fresh opportunity. Lord have mercy. Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow, having emerged from her boarding house next door. Who would do such a thing? Eleanor knew who, or at least who'd inspired it. It doesn't matter. She unlocked the door with steady hands, though her heart hammered. I need to clean this up before nothing. You go inside. I'll fetch water and rags. Mrs. Chen's usually soft voice turned firm. And I'll get my husband. He's good with paint. Within an hour, a small army of unexpected allies had gathered. Walter Green arrived with turpentine and brushes. The baker's wife brought fresh paint. Even Doc Hartley rolled up his sleeves, muttering about damn fools with too much time and too little conscience. Eleanor worked alongside them, scrubbing at the cruel words until her hands were raw. She wanted to weep at their kindness, these people who'd found the courage to stand against the tide of popular opinion. But tears would have to wait. She had a business to salvage, and now, it seemed, only weeks to do it. Mrs. Hayes, a young voice interrupted her scrubbing. Timothy Morrison, the minister's son, stood shifting from foot to foot. My ma sent me to say she's sorry about all this, and she wants to know if you could make her a new Sunday dress. Eleanor blinked. Mrs. Morrison had been among the coldest toward her, standing silent while others spread gossip. She does. Yes, ma'am. She said to tell you she'll pay in advance. Full price. The boy thrust out an envelope. She also said to say that Christian charity means helping neighbors, not tearing them down. and she's been remiss in her duty." It was an olive branch Eleanor hadn't expected. She accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. "Tell your mother I'm grateful, and I'll do my very best work for her." The boy scampered off, and Eleanor turned to find James Rowan watching from across the street. He'd been there for some time, she realized, organizing the cleanup efforts without making himself the center of attention. When their eyes met, he crossed to her. "You all right?" "I've been better." She managed a wan smile. "But worse, too." "At least this time, I'm not alone." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." "James, about what Marvin said yesterday, the debt? I've been asking questions carefully, as you requested." His jaw tightened. "There's something off about that promissory note. My banker contact in Tucson never heard of Thomas taking a loan from Judge Hale's bank, but proving it's fake would take lawyers and time I don't have." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. "I've been doing calculations. If I work every hour God sends, take every commission offered, I might make half what I need. Maybe." "Eleanor." "Don't." She held up a hand. "Whatever you're about to offer, please don't. I need to know I can stand on my own feet, even if I fall." He studied her for a long moment. "All right, but you'll let me know if you need anything." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He squeezed her shoulder gently the first time he touched her beyond formal handshakes and returned to directing the cleanup. By noon, the shop looked almost normal. The sign would need repainting properly, but the slurs were gone. Eleanor had salvaged most of the window display, and a steady stream of customers real. Paying customers kept the bell ringing all afternoon. It seemed Mrs. Morrison's public reversal had given others permission to follow suit. Women who'd walked past for months suddenly needed alterations, new aprons, mending work. Eleanor's order book filled faster than it had since Thomas's death. But even as she calculated the new income, she knew it wouldn't be enough. $400 in a month, she'd need a miracle. That evening, as she worked late on Mrs. Morrison's dress, a soft knock came at her back door. She tensed after the morning's vandalism. Unexpected visitors made her nervous. "Eleanor, it's Sarah Tucker." Eleanor recognized the name Bill Tucker's wife, James's foreman. She opened the door to find a plump, pleasant-faced woman holding a covered basket. "Mrs. Tucker, what?" "Sarah, please. Brought you supper. Figured you'd be too busy working to cook." Sarah bustled in without waiting for invitation. "And I wanted to talk business." "Business?" "My husband runs the Rowan Ranch Hands. 20 men who are death on clothing. I do my best with mending. But..." Sarah shook her head ruefully. "I'm better with cooking than needlework. We've been sending to Denver for clothes, but the quality's poor and the shipping takes forever." Eleanor's heart beat faster. "What are you proposing?" "A contract. Regular work clothes for all our hands. Shirts, trousers, winter coats. You'd provide the labor. We'd provide the materials and patterns." Sarah named a price per garment that was more than fair. "Could you handle that volume?" It would mean working until her fingers bled. It would mean lamp oil burned late into every night. But it would also mean steady income. Significant income. "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Yes, I could handle it." "Excellent. I'll need the first set within 2 weeks. The boys are particular about their winter gear." Sarah unpacked the supper beef stew and fresh bread. "Eat while we discuss details. You're too thin." They talked patterns and measurements while Eleanor ate the first hot meal she'd had in days. Only after Sarah left did Eleanor realize the woman had paid in advance for the first dozen shirts. The money wouldn't cover Marvin's debt, but it was a start. She was cutting fabric at midnight when another knock came. This time, she approached with a poker in hand. "It's Sam McAllister, Mrs. Hayes. Got something important." The old storekeeper had never visited her shop at night. Eleanor opened the door cautiously. Sorry for the hour, but this couldn't wait. Sam held out a leather portfolio. Been going through old papers. Found something interesting. Eleanor took the portfolio, frowning at the documents inside. These are Thomas's medical bills, all marked paid. That's right, paid in full, 2 days before he died. Look at the bottom of the last page. She squinted at the faded ink. Paid by draft from First National Bank, Tucson. Authorized by... Her breath caught. Judge Wendell Hale. The very same. Now why would Judge Hale pay your husband's medical bills? Then have his son claim you owed money for the same bills? Eleanor sank into a chair. He wouldn't, unless the judge doesn't know what his son's been up to. Sam's expression was grim. Boy's been gambling heavy in Tucson. Word is he owes some dangerous people significant money. Might be desperate enough to forge his father's name on a false promissory note. But I can't prove that without these receipts, which I'm giving you free and clear. Sam smiled. Sometimes pack rats like me come in handy. Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest for the first time in days. Sam, I don't know how to thank... Then don't. Just keep making this town remember what decency looks like. After he left, Eleanor sat surrounded by evidence that might save her, but she'd need to be strategic. Confronting Marvin directly would only make him more dangerous. She needed to think, to plan. A third knock came near 1 a.m. This time, Eleanor didn't hesitate. She knew that knock. You should be asleep, she told James as she let him in. So should you. He took in the chaos of fabric and half-finished garments. Sarah told me about the contract. Your idea. Her initiative, though I might have mentioned our hands needed new clothes. He pulled something from his coat. This is from Bill and the boys, not charity and investment. The envelope was thick with bills. Eleanor didn't open it. James. They want to be shareholders in your business. Silent partners. They've seen what you can do. And cowboys appreciate quality gear. This makes you their exclusive supplier, in exchange for startup capital. It was cleverly done, not charity, but business, allowing her to keep her pride while providing crucial funds. Did you arrange this? I mentioned the opportunity. The men made their own choice. He paused. Eleanor, there's something else. About Marvin's debt. Sam found receipts. The medical bills were paid by Judge Hale himself. She showed him the documents. But I still need to be careful how I use this information. James studied the papers, his expression thoughtful. The judge is in Denver until week's end, but his secretary, Mr. Paulson, has authority to verify documents. If we approached him quietly, You don't have to do this alone. His voice was gentle but firm. I know you need to stand on your own feet, but even the strongest person needs someone watching their back occasionally. Eleanor felt tears threaten again. This man, who'd known such loss, who'd wrapped himself in solitude like armor, was offering to stand with her against the world's cruelty. All right, she whispered. We'll go together. Good. Day after tomorrow, early morning, before Marvin knows what's happening. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Eleanor, you're going to win this. How can you be so sure? Because you're fighting for more than survival now. You're fighting for the right to live with dignity, and that's a battle worth winning. After he left, Eleanor returned to her sewing with renewed energy. Her fingers flew over the fabric, each stitch an act of defiance against those who would see her broken. The vandalism, the threats, the manufactured debt, they were all weapons in a war she hadn't chosen but wouldn't abandon. Outside, someone moved in the shadows. Eleanor caught a glimpse through the window and tensed, but it was only Bill Tucker, positioned casually across the street, whittling in the lamplight, a cowboy keeping watch. She realized, protection arranged by James without fanfare or fuss. She bent back to her work, a small smile playing at her lips. Marvin Hale thought he'd trapped a desperate woman with nowhere to turn. He was about to learn that Eleanor Hayes had something more powerful than money or influence. She had friends. And in Dry Creek, where loyalty was earned rather than bought, that might just be enough. The saloon fell silent when James Rowan pushed through the swinging doors. It was the kind of silence that spoke of interrupted conversations and guilty consciences. He scanned the room until he found his target, Marvin Hale, holding court at a corner table. Whiskey bottle half empty, mouth running full. "Told you she'd spread her legs for the highest bidder," Marvin was saying to his companions. "First that dead husband of hers, now Rowan. Woman like that knows exactly what she's—" The words died as James reached the table. The men sitting with Marvin suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, leaving the younger man alone with his whiskey and bravado. "Rowan." Marvin's smile was loose, ugly. "Come to defend your whore's honor?" James pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet that made smart men nervous. "You're going to apologize." "Am I?" Marvin laughed. "For telling the truth, everyone knows what she is, what you're paying for." "What I know," James said evenly, "is that you're a small man trying to destroy a good woman because she had the sense to refuse you. What I know is that you've been spreading lies that would make your father ashamed." "My father doesn't know about the promissory note you forged, yet." James let that sink in. "But he will, unless you publicly retract every lie you've told about Mrs. Hayes." Marvin's face went white, then red. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" James pulled out a paper, not the receipts, which were safe with Eleanor, but close enough to make Marvin sweat. "Interesting thing about forgery? Leaves traces, paper trails, angry creditors in Tucson who'd love to know where their money went." The saloon had gone completely quiet now, every ear straining to hear. James raised his voice just enough to carry, "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're going to stand up in church and confess that you lied about Mrs. Hayes. You're going to admit the debt is false. And then you're going to leave town." "Go to hell." James leaned forward. "I buried my wife and daughter 5 years ago. Stood at their graves and thought I'd never care about anything again. But watching you try to destroy that woman—" He shook his head. "You've given me something I haven't had in years. Marvin, purpose. And I'm a man who sees things through. You're threatening me. I'm promising you, retract the lies, or I'll make sure everyone from here to San Francisco knows exactly what kind of man you are. Starting with your father." Marvin's hands shook as he reached for his glass. Around them, the other patrons had given up all pretense of not listening. These were working men, most of them, who'd seen Eleanor Hayes work honest hours for honest pay, who'd watched her hold her head high when lesser folks would have broken. "She turned you down too, didn't she?" Marvin's voice was bitter. "That's what this is about. You want her same as me, but she won't." The words ended in a gurgle as James's hands shot out, not to strike, but to grip Marvin's wrist before he could throw the whiskey in James's face. "The difference between us," James said softly, "is that I see Eleanor Hayes as a person, not a possession. And that's why, when I leave here, I'll be welcome in her shop, while you'll be packing your bags." He released Marvin's wrist and stood. "Church, tomorrow, 10 o'clock. The night air hit him cool and clean after the saloon smoke. James hadn't intended to confront Marvin so publicly, but hearing those filthy words about Eleanor had stripped away his careful control. He'd meant what he said about purpose. For 5 years, he'd been going through the motions of living. Now, with Eleanor to protect, he felt truly alive again. "Mr. Rowan." He turned to find Reverend Morrison approaching. "Reverend." "I couldn't help but overhear. Well, the whole street couldn't help but overhear." The minister's expression was troubled. "I owe Mrs. Hayes an apology. I stood by while good people were cruel to her. My wife helped me see the error of that. She needs more than apologies. Yes. The Reverend squared his shoulders. If Marvin Hale has something to say tomorrow, I'll make sure he's heard. And I'll add my own words about bearing false witness and the treatment of widows in Scripture. Word traveled fast in Dry Creek. By the time James reached Eleanor's shop, a small crowd had gathered. He pushed through to find Bill Tucker and several ranch hands standing guard while Eleanor faced down Constance Weatherby. Decent women don't entertain men after dark. Constance was saying, "And now we know why you've been so cozy with Mr. Rowan, trading your favors." "That's enough." Eleanor's voice cut sharp as winter wind. "I've endured your gossip, your cruelty, your attempts to destroy my business, but I won't stand here and let you call me a prostitute." Constance gasped. "Such language, though I suppose we shouldn't expect better from someone of your background." "My background?" Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean as a minister's daughter? Oh yes, Mrs. Weatherby. My father served a parish in Missouri for 30 years. I grew up in a parsonage, learned my letters from the Bible, and spent my Saturdays visiting the sick and poor." The crowd stirred. This was news to most of them. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "I met Thomas when he came to discuss charity work with my father. We courted for a year under the strictest propriety. When we married, I thought I'd found my fairy tale. Then the sickness came, the debts mounted, and I learned that fairy tales are for children." She stepped forward, and Constance stepped back. "You want to know what I've done to survive? I've worked 18-hour days until my fingers bled. I've mended clothes by candlelight because lamp oil cost too much. I've gone hungry so I could buy thread. And yes, I've accepted friendship from James Rowan, a man who treats me with more respect than you've ever shown." "Friendship?" Constance's voice dripped acid. "Is that what you call it?" "Yes." James stepped into the circle of lamplight. "That's exactly what I call it, though after tomorrow, I hope to court Mrs. Hayes properly, with the whole town watching, so there can be no doubt about our intentions." Eleanor's sharp intake of breath was audible. "James!" "If you'll have me." He removed his hat, suddenly aware of the crowd, the moment, the weight of what he was saying. "I'm not much for pretty words. I'm set in my ways, marked by loss, and I've forgotten most of what I knew about courting. But I know quality when I see it. And Eleanor Hayes, you're the finest person I've met in 5 years." The crowd had gone silent. Even Constance seemed struck dumb. Eleanor's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You don't have to do this, not to save my reputation." "I'm not." He took her hand, rough fingers gentle against hers. "I'm doing it because I'm tired of visiting your shop with excuses. Because you've made me want things I thought were buried with Mary. Because you deserve to be courted in daylight, with flowers and Sunday dinners and all the things proper people do." Eleanor's voice broke. Yes, I'll have you." Someone in the crowd cheered. Others joined in, drowning out Constance's sputtering protests. James pulled Eleanor closer, not quite an embrace that would wait for private moments, but a clear statement of protection and intent. "About time," Doc Hartley called out. "Man's been mooning over you for months." "Hush," his wife scolded, but she was smiling. "This doesn't solve your problems," Constance hissed at Eleanor. "You still owe—" "Nothing." Eleanor's chin came up. "I owe nothing to anyone who matters, and after tomorrow, everyone will know it." She didn't elaborate, but James saw Constance pale at the certainty in her voice. The crowd began to disperse, most offering congratulations, some still skeptical but no longer openly hostile. When they were finally alone, Eleanor sagged against her shop door. "Did you mean it about courting?" "Every word." He touched her cheek gently. "Though I should warn you, I'm out of practice. Might put my foot wrong. I'm a widow with a vandalized shop and a forged debt. I think we're even. She covered his hand with hers. James, what you did in the saloon, the whole town's talking about it. Let them talk. Maybe they'll have something true to say for once. She laughed, the sound like water in the desert. Will you really make Marvin confess? He'll confess, or he'll face worse than humiliation. His father's an honest man. Whatever his sons become, Judge Hale won't shield him from fraud charges. It seems almost too easy after everything. It's not over. James grew serious. Marvin might run instead of confessing. Constance won't give up. There'll be those who think I'm taking advantage or that you're using me. We'll face challenges. But we'll face them together. If you'll let me. She squeezed his hand. Stay for coffee, I have something to show you. Inside. She led him to a table covered with completed garments. 20 shirts, 10 pairs of trousers, 5 coats, all ready for your ranch hands. Sarah's commission finished a week early. Eleanor, this is incredible. When did you sleep? When I finished. She smiled at his concern. I wanted to prove I could meet the deadline, that I'm worth the investment your men made. You're worth far more than that. He examined a shirt, admiring the precise stitching. These are better than anything from Denver. I added reinforced seams where Sarah said they usually tear, and extra pockets. Cowboys never have enough pockets. She bit her lip. Do you think they'll approve? They'll be fighting over who gets which shirt. He set the garment down carefully. Eleanor, about the partnership investment. I know it was mostly you. Actually, no. The men insisted on contributing. Said any woman who could stand up to Marvin Hale and keep working deserved backing. He smiled. Though I may have added a little extra. She moved closer, and for a moment they stood together in the lamplight, surrounded by evidence of her skill and determination. Outside, Dry Creek settled into sleep, unaware that in a small dress shop, 2 wounded souls were taking the first tentative steps toward healing. I should go, James said reluctantly. Dawn comes early, and you need rest. Will you come to church tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. He squeezed her hand once more. Whatever happens with Marvin, remember you're not facing it alone anymore. After he left, Eleanor tidied the shop, her movements light despite her exhaustion. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, possibly vindication, certainly change. But tonight, she had work completed, bills that could be paid, and the promise of a courtship with a man who saw her worth beyond gossip or circumstances. She paused at the window, watching James's retreating figure. He'd offered her more than protection or financial security. He'd offered respect, partnership, a chance to build something new from the ashes of their respective losses. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better real, complicated, grounded in mutual understanding and shared pain transformed slowly into hope. Tomorrow the town would watch as truth challenged lies in God's house. But tonight, Eleanor Hayes had already won the only battle that truly mattered. She'd remembered how to believe in tomorrow. The church bells hadn't yet rung when Eleanor arrived, but already the pews were filling. Word of the promised confrontation had spread like wildfire, drawing even those who normally spent Sunday mornings nursing Saturday night's excesses. She slipped into a seat near the back, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed her movement. James appeared at her elbow as if materialized from thin air. You don't have to sit back here. I'm not hiding, she said quietly. Just choosing my battles. He nodded and sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Around them, the congregation buzzed with anticipation. Eleanor spotted Constance Weatherby in her usual front pew, back rigid with disapproval. Sam McAllister sat with his wife, giving Eleanor an encouraging nod. Doc Hartley and the Chens had taken seats in the middle, a subtle but clear statement of support. But no Marvin Hale. He'll come, James murmured, reading her thoughts. He has too much pride to run without trying to salvage something. Reverend Morrison took the pulpit, and the crowd settled into expectant silence. He began with announcements, his voice carrying its usual measured cadence, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. "Before we begin today's sermon," the Reverend said, "I believe someone has something they wish to share with the congregation. Mr. Hale." Every head turned. Marvin stood in the doorway, his appearance shocking to those who knew his usual attention to grooming. His clothes were wrinkled, his face haggard, and the smell of whiskey clung to him like a second skin. "Get on with it, then," he slurred, making his way unsteadily down the aisle. "Marvin," the Reverend's voice held warning. "Perhaps you should—" "No," Marvin wheeled around, facing the congregation. "You all want a show? Fine. I'll give you one." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. This wasn't the contrite confession James had demanded. This was something else, something dangerous. "You want to know about Eleanor Hayes?" Marvin's laugh was ugly. "I'll tell you about her. Came here playing the grieving widow, all tears and dignity. But I saw through it. Saw what she really was." "That's enough." James started to rise, but Eleanor caught his arm. "Let him finish," she whispered. "Let everyone see." Marvin stumbled on. "Offered to help her. Didn't I offer to pay her debts, set her up proper? Any sensible woman would have been grateful. But no, she had to play coy, had to pretend she was too good for Marvin Hale." "Because I was," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly. "I am." The congregation gasped at her boldness. Marvin's face darkened. "Too good you." He laughed harshly. "A penniless widow with debts she couldn't pay. You should have been grateful for my attention." "Grateful," Eleanor stood slowly. "For what? For spreading lies when I refused your advances, for forging documents to trap me. I never—" "Never what?" Eleanor pulled out the receipts Sam had given her. "Never forged a promissory note claiming I owed money for medical debts your own father had already paid." The silence in the church was absolute. Marvin's face went from red to white. "That's— You can't prove—" "Can't I?" Eleanor walked forward, each step measured. "I have the receipts, signed by your father, dated 2 days before my husband died, every medical bill paid in full." "Let me see those." Judge Hale's voice cracked like a whip from the back of the church. No one had seen him enter, but there he stood, travel-dusty and grim-faced. Eleanor handed over the documents. The judge examined them, his expression growing stonier with each page. "These are genuine," he said finally. "My signature, my bank's seal." He looked at his son with eyes like flint. "Marvin, did you claim Mrs. Hayes owed money for these bills?" There must be some mistake." "The only mistake," Judge Hale said coldly, "was my failure to see what you'd become. Mrs. Hayes, I apologize for my son's behavior. Rest assured, any claims against you will be withdrawn immediately." "It's not enough." James stood, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to command. "Your son has spent months destroying this woman's reputation with lies. He's vandalized her property, spread vicious rumors, attempted to force her into a compromising position. An apology doesn't erase that." Judge Hale's face was granite. "What would you have me do?" "What you do for anyone else who committed fraud and defamation? Apply the law." Father and son stared at each other across the church. Marvin broke first. "You can't. I'm your son. Which is why this hurts more than you know." The judge's voice was heavy with disappointment. "But Mr. Rowan is right. The law applies to everyone, even judges' sons, especially judges' sons." Marvin's composure shattered completely. "This is her fault, that witch seduced you all, made you think." "Enough," Reverend Morrison's voice boomed from the pulpit. "This is a house of God, not a courtroom or a saloon. Marvin Hale, you've confessed to bearing false witness. That's a grave sin, one that requires genuine repentance." "Repentance," Marvin laughed wildly. For telling the truth about what she is, the only truth told here today, Eleanor said quietly, is that I'm a widow who refused to be bullied or bought. If that makes me a witch in your eyes, so be it. Well said. The voice came from the back Mrs. Morrison, standing with several other women. I've been silent too long, cowed by gossip and propriety. But I watched this woman work herself to exhaustion to pay honest debts. I've seen her kindness to those who spurned her. If that's witchcraft, we need more of it. Others stood the Chens, Walter Green, Sam McAllister, one by one. People Eleanor had helped or who had simply observed her quiet dignity rose to their feet. Not everyone Constance Weatherby remained seated, face pinched with fury, but enough, more than enough. Marvin looked around wildly, seeing his support evaporate. You're all fools! She's played you all! The only fool here, Judge Hale said quietly, is the boy I raised who became a man I don't recognize, Sheriff Watson. The sheriff, who'd been watching from the side door, stepped forward. Judge, I believe my son has confessed to fraud, defamation, and property destruction. Please take him into custody pending formal charges. The walk to the jail would be short, but public the ultimate humiliation for someone who'd traded on his family name. Marvin struggled briefly, then seemed to collapse in on himself as the sheriff led him away. In the aftermath, the church buzzed with shocked conversation. Judge Hale approached Eleanor, his dignity intact despite his personal shame. Mrs. Hayes, I cannot undo the harm my son caused, but I can ensure you're compensated for damages and that your reputation is formally cleared. If you'll accept it, I'd like to place a standing order for judicial robes and court furnishings. Your work comes highly recommended. It was more than an olive branch, it was public acknowledgement of her skill and character. Eleanor inclined her head. I'd be honored. Judge Hale. Furthermore, the judge continued, raising his voice to Carrie. Let it be known that anyone spreading false rumors about Mrs. Hayes will answer to me personally. The law protects the innocent from malicious gossip as surely as from theft or assault. After the judge left, Eleanor found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Some offered apologies for their previous behavior. Others simply pressed her hand with murmured support. Through it all, James stayed close, a protective presence that no one dared challenge. When the crowd finally thinned, Constance Weatherby approached, her coterie of gossips flanking her like guard dogs. Don't think this changes anything, she hissed. One dramatic scene doesn't erase what you are. And what am I? Eleanor asked calmly. An opportunist, a woman who used her wiles to ensnare a grieving widower. Constance's gaze flicked to James. He'll tire of you once the novelty wears off. Perhaps, Eleanor agreed, surprising them. Or perhaps he'll find that a woman who can survive what I have makes a worthy partner. Either way, it's between James and myself. Your opinion ceased to matter when you tried to destroy me for sport. She turned to leave, but Constance grabbed her arm. You think you've won? Eleanor looked down at the gripping fingers, then up at Constance's twisted face. I think I've survived. For someone who started with nothing but debt and determination, that's victory enough. She pulled free and walked away. James beside her, behind them. Constance sputtered threats that no one bothered to hear. Outside the church, the autumn sun shone bright and clean. Eleanor breathed deeply, feeling as if she'd shed a tremendous weight. The road ahead wasn't clear. There would still be those who whispered, those who doubted. But the worst was over. You were magnificent, James said quietly. I was terrified. She managed a shaky laugh. My knees are still trembling. Mine, too. At her surprised look, he smiled. Facing down rustlers is nothing compared to standing up in church and declaring your intentions toward a lady. Is that what you were doing? Among other things. He offered his arm. Walk with me. They strolled through the quiet Sunday streets, nodding to those they passed. Some greeted them warmly, others with reservation, but no one turned away or whispered behind raised hands. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. Now I court you properly. Sunday dinners at the ranch, rides in the countryside, flowers when I can find them. All the things I should have done months ago if I hadn't been so caught up in my own grief. James, I know you're still grieving Thomas. I'm not asking you to forget him or replace him. But maybe, together, we can build something new. Something that honors our pasts while embracing a future. Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully. I'd like that, but I need you to understand I won't be a dependent. I'll keep working, keep my shop. I need to know I can stand on my own. I wouldn't want it any other way. His expression softened. Your strength is part of what drew me to you. That and your smile, rare as it's been. Perhaps I'll have more reason to smile now. They resumed walking, comfortable in shared silence. As they passed the jail, Eleanor glanced at the barred window where Marvin presumably waited for his father's lawyers. Do you think he'll serve time? Unlikely. The judge will probably arrange restitution and exile. Send him back east to relatives, away from temptation and bad company. James squeezed her arm gently. But he won't trouble you again. They'd reached Eleanor's shop. The vandalized sign had been properly repaired, the windows cleaned until they sparkled. Someone, probably Bill Tucker's crew, had even planted flowers in the window boxes. It looks like home, Eleanor said softly. It is home, your home, that you built with your own hands and determination. James faced her, taking both her hands in his. Eleanor Hayes, you humble me. You've faced down the worst this town could offer and emerged stronger. I'm honored that you'll let me stand beside you. Beside, not in front of, always beside, partners in whatever comes. She smiled then, truly smiled, and James felt his heart turn over. This woman who'd endured so much, who'd fought so hard for simple dignity, was choosing to trust him with her future. Would you like to come in for that coffee we never seem to finish? I'd like that very much. Inside the shop, surrounded by fabric and thread, the tools of her trade and independence, they sat together in companionable warmth. Outside, Dry Creek went about its Sunday business, forever changed by one woman's refusal to break and one man's decision to stand for what was right. The gossips would always gossip. The bitter would remain bitter. But Eleanor Hayes had won more than a battle against lies. She'd won the right to live on her own terms, with her head high and her heart open to possibility. And that, James thought as he watched her laugh at something Doc Hartley called through the window, was worth any amount of small-town drama. The wagon from Tucson arrived on a crisp November morning, drawing curious stares as it rumbled down Main Street. Eleanor stood in her shop doorway, heart pounding as she recognized the driver, Robert Clearwater, her father's old friend who'd helped her escape to Dry Creek after Thomas died. Got a delivery for you. Eleanor, Robert called, climbing down stiffly. Letters and packages from folks who heard about your troubles. Heard about them how? Robert grinned. Your friend Mrs. Chen has a cousin in Tucson who runs a boarding house. Word spreads among certain circles, the kind of women who know what it's like to struggle. They unloaded box after box, each one containing fabric, supplies, and letters. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the first envelope. Dear Mrs. Hayes, she read aloud to James, who'd appeared at her side. I heard through Mrs. Chen's cousin about your situation. You may not remember me, but you hemmed my wedding dress 3 years ago when I couldn't afford a seamstress. You refused payment, saying every bride deserved to feel beautiful. I never forgot that kindness. Please accept this small token of gratitude. Inside was a bolt of exquisite silk and $10 a fortune from a working woman. Letter after letter told similar stories. Women Eleanor had helped during her time in Tucson, often in ways she'd considered insignificant. a modified dress to hide a pregnancy before marriage was announced, clothes altered for a woman who'd lost weight from illness, teaching a young girl to sew so she could support her family. "My heavens," Eleanor whispered, overwhelmed. "I had no idea." "The kindness we show echoes longer than we know," James said quietly. "You planted seeds in Tucson. Now you're harvesting the crop." Among the packages was a leather portfolio marked with her name inside. Documents that made Eleanor gasp. "What is it?" James asked. It's the deed to Thomas's old shop in Tucson, free and clear." She read the accompanying letter with tears streaming. "The women's auxiliary at my father's church raised funds to buy it from the creditors. They're asking if I want to sell it or open a second location." James watched emotions play across her face: surprise, gratitude, uncertainty. "What do you want?" "I don't know. I built a life here, have obligations, but Tucson—" She touched the deed reverently. "We were happy there, before the sickness." "You don't have to decide today." He squeezed her shoulder. "But Eleanor, this is remarkable. You've inspired such loyalty." A commotion outside interrupted them. Constance Weatherby stood in the street with several supporters, voice raised in indignation. "Bringing outside influences to corrupt our town. First she seduces our men. Now she's importing her city ways. Oh, for heaven's sake!" Eleanor marched outside, patience finally exhausted. "Mrs. Weatherby, what exactly is your complaint now?" "This," Constance gestured wildly at the wagon. "Packages from Tucson, probably full of inappropriate materials, corrupting influences, letters from church women and fabric donations," Eleanor said flatly. "Would you like to inspect them? Perhaps the silk is secretly scandalous, the buttons plotting overthrow." Snickers arose from the gathering crowd. Constance flushed. "You mock me, but I know what you are. A Jezebel who refused to cower before bitter women with nothing better to do than spread misery." Eleanor stepped closer. "I've tried patience. I've tried dignity. I've turned the other cheek until I'm dizzy from spinning. But I'm done being your entertainment. Constance, how dare you?" "I dare because I've earned the right." Eleanor's voice carried clearly. "I've paid my debts through honest work. I've helped anyone who asked, regardless of how they treated me. I've built a business and found love despite your best efforts to destroy both. So here's what's going to happen." She paused, ensuring everyone was listening. "You're going to stop. No more lies, no more harassment, no more poison. Because if you don't, I'll use these donations to hire the best lawyer in the territory and sue you for defamation. Judge Hale himself said the law protects against malicious gossip." "You wouldn't dare," Constance sputtered. "Try me." Eleanor's smile was sharp as her best scissors. "I've survived poverty, widowhood, and your worst efforts. A lawsuit would be refreshing by comparison." Sheriff Watson, who'd been watching from his office, strolled over. "Ladies, is there a problem?" "No problem, Sheriff," Eleanor said calmly. "Mrs. Weatherby was just leaving. Weren't you?" Constance. Faced with legal authority and public opposition, Constance retreated with her followers, muttering threats that convinced no one. "Remind me never to cross you," Robert Clearwater said admiringly. "You've grown steel in your spine, Eleanor." "Dry Creek forged it," she replied, then smiled, though I had help tempering it. James helped unload the remaining packages while Robert shared news from Tucson. The women who'd contributed were forming a cooperative, supporting widows and working women. They wanted Eleanor to consider being their West Texas representative. Building a network. Robert explained. Women helping women across territory lines. Share patterns, techniques, support each other during hard times. "It's brilliant," Eleanor breathed. "Isolated, we're vulnerable. Together." You're formidable? James finished. You should do it. That evening, Eleanor hosted a gathering in her shop. The women who'd supported her came to see the donations and hear about the cooperative. Mrs. Chen brought tea. Sarah Tucker brought cake. And even Mrs. Morrison contributed sandwiches. It's not charity, Eleanor explained, showing them the proposal. It's mutual support. We share knowledge, help find markets for each other's work, provide assistance during difficulties. No woman stands alone. I like it, Mrs. Chen declared. My boarding house could be a stopping point for women traveling between towns. My ranch could provide wool directly, Sarah Tucker added. Cut out the middlemen who overcharge. Ideas flew fast and thick. By evening's end, they'd laid groundwork for Dry Creek's first women's business cooperative. Even women who'd initially opposed Eleanor saw the potential benefit. You've changed this town, Mrs. Morrison told Eleanor quietly. Shown us we don't have to accept the way things have always been. After everyone left, Eleanor and James sat among the scattered papers and empty teacups. The shop felt alive with possibility. You're really doing this, James said, building something bigger than just a dress shop. Does that bother you? I know you mentioned courtship, but this would mean travel, meetings, time away. Eleanor, he took her hands. I fell in love with a fighter. Why would I want to cage her? The ranch has good managers. I can travel with you sometimes, hold down the fort others. Partners. Remember. Love, she whispered. You said love. I did. His weathered face softened. Too soon. No, not too soon. She squeezed his hands. I love you too. James. Not the desperate love of youth or the comfortable love of long marriage, but something new. Love born from understanding, from seeing each other's scars and choosing to heal together. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, promise and proclamation in one. When they parted, both were smiling. There's something else, Eleanor said. The deed to Tucson, I've decided. I'll sell it. Use the money to expand here and fund the cooperative. Dry Creek is my home now, where I found my strength, my purpose, and you. You're sure? Completely. Thomas and I were happy in Tucson, but that chapter closed with his death. This is my story now, and I want to write it here. Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. The women's cooperative grew rapidly, attracting members from surrounding towns. Orders flowed in not just for Eleanor, but for all members. Mrs. Chen's boarding house became a hub for traveling businesswomen. Sarah Tucker's wool operation expanded. Even former opponents found themselves drawn in. Constance Weatherby never joined, but her followers gradually drifted away, finding more satisfaction in building than tearing down. You've done something remarkable, Judge Hale told Eleanor when he came to collect his judicial robes. Turned personal triumph into community transformation. I had help, Eleanor replied, glancing at James, who was teaching young Timothy Morrison to properly fold fabric. And I had examples the women in Tucson who supported me, Mrs. Chen who stood by me, Sarah who took a chance. We rise by lifting others. The judge smiled. My son wrote from Philadelphia. He's working in my brother's law office, learning honest employment. Your strength in facing him showed me I'd been enabling his worst impulses. You may have saved him from himself. I hope he finds his way, Eleanor said sincerely. Everyone deserves a second chance. I got mine. That Sunday, Reverend Morrison announced the first wedding to be held in the newly refurbished church, James Rowan and Eleanor Hayes. Come spring. The congregation erupted in approval, though Constance Weatherby's sour face suggested at least one dissenter remained. But Eleanor didn't care. Surrounded by friends, engaged to a man who saw her as an equal. Building something that would outlast them all, she'd found more than survival in Dry Creek. She'd found a purpose worth living for. That night, she wrote letters to Tucson, sharing the good news and formal cooperative plans. As her pen moved across paper, James reading nearby, snow beginning to fall outside. Eleanor felt Thomas's presence not as a weight or guilt, but as a gentle blessing. He'd want her happy, want her using the skills he'd admired to help others. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, "just thinking how strange life is. If Thomas hadn't died, if I hadn't been desperate enough to come here, if the town hadn't been cruel enough to forge my determination, then we'd never have met. The cooperative wouldn't exist. Dozens of women would still be struggling alone." He set aside his book, not saying the pain was worth it, but sometimes hardship shapes us into who we're meant to be. Speaking of shaping, Eleanor pulled out a measuring tape. "You need a new suit for the wedding, something that fits properly for once." "Woman, I asked you to marry me, not perform miracles." She laughed, the sound filling the shop with warmth. "James Rowan, reshaping you will be my greatest challenge yet. Looking forward to it, Mrs. Hayes. Looking forward to a lifetime of it." Outside, snow blanketed Dry Creek, covering old sins and gossip with pristine white. Come morning, the sun would reveal a town transformed, not perfect, but better. A place where a widow's determination had planted seeds of change that would bloom for generations. But tonight, in the warmth of the shop, two people who'd thought love lost forever discovered it could grow again. Stronger for the breaking, and that was miracle enough for any story. Spring arrived in Dry Creek with a profusion of wildflowers that painted the desert in impossible colors. Purple lupines, golden poppies, and white evening primroses transformed the harsh landscape into something from a fairy tale. It seemed fitting, Eleanor thought, that nature itself would celebrate the wedding day. She stood before the mirror in her shop's back room, adjusting the simple but elegant dress she'd made from the Tucson silk. Mrs. Chen fussed with her veil while Sarah Tucker arranged orange blossoms in her hair. "You're radiant." "Mrs." Morrison declared, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "James won't know what hit him." "He's already been hit." Sarah laughed. "Man's been walking into walls since you agreed to marry him." Eleanor smiled, touching the cameo at her throat, James's wedding gift, which had belonged to his mother. "I never imagined I'd marry again after Thomas died. I thought that part of my life was over. Life has a way of surprising us." "Mrs." Chen said softly, "the best things come when we stop looking for them." A knock interrupted their preparations. Doc Hartley's wife peered in. "Eleanor, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Eleanor's heart sank. What crisis could possibly arise on her wedding day? She gathered her skirts and hurried to the front, finding a travel-worn woman clutching a young girl's hand. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Martha Bellwether, from Denver. I heard about your cooperative through my sister in Tucson." The woman's eyes were desperate. "My husband died last month. The bank's taking everything. I have nowhere to go, no skills except sewing. And Lucy here." The little girl, perhaps 7 years old, looked up with eyes too old for her years. Eleanor's heart clenched, remembering her own desperation after Thomas died. "Please," Martha continued. "I'll work for room and board. I'll scrub floors. Anything. I just need a chance to start over." Eleanor glanced at the clock. 30 minutes until the ceremony. She should send them to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Deal with this tomorrow. But the fear in Martha's eyes, the way Lucy clutched a worn cloth doll. "Sarah?" Eleanor called. "Can you help Mrs. Bellwether get Lucy some food, Mrs. Chen, is your upstairs room still available?" "Of course." "Mrs." Chen responded immediately, understanding Eleanor's intent. "But it's your wedding day," Martha protested. "I shouldn't have—" "Nonsense." Eleanor took her hands. "The cooperative exists for moments like this. You'll stay at Mrs. Chen's tonight. Start working with me tomorrow." We'll figure out the details later. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't. Just help another woman when you're able. Eleanor smiled at Lucy. Do you like cake? We're having a party later, and I'd love for you to come. The girl's face lit up. The first childlike expression Eleanor had seen from her. Really? Really. Now let my friends help you get settled. I have a wedding to attend. As the women bustled Martha and Lucy away. Mrs. Morrison shook her head. Only you would stop to help a stranger on your wedding day. James will understand. Eleanor said, It's one of the reasons I love him. The church was packed when Eleanor arrived. Every pew full and people standing along the walls. The Women's Cooperative had drawn members from 3 counties, and it seemed they'd all come to celebrate. But Eleanor only had eyes for the man waiting at the altar. James stood tall in his new suit, properly fitted. She noted with satisfaction his weathered face transformed by a smile of such pure joy it took her breath away. Beside him, Bill Tucker served as best man, while young Timothy Morrison waited with the rings. The walk down the aisle felt both eternal and instant. Eleanor was aware of faces turning toward her, some who'd scorned her, some who'd supported her, all now witnessing her triumph. But mostly she was aware of James, of the life they were about to build together. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with unusual emotion. When he spoke of love conquering adversity, of 2 souls finding each other through loss, several people wiped away tears. Eleanor, James said when it came time for vows, his voice strong and clear. You came to Dry Creek seeking survival and found strength. I was merely existing until you showed me how to live again. You've taught me that love isn't just about holding on, it's about letting each other fly. I promise to support your dreams, defend your honor, and spend every day grateful that the worst of times brought us together. Eleanor's own vows came from the heart. James, you stood for me when I couldn't stand alone. You saw past the gossip to the person beneath. You offered partnership, not possession, respect alongside love. I promise to build a life with you based on trust, equality, and the knowledge that we're stronger together than apart. When Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. Even Constance Weatherby, sulking in a back pew, couldn't dampen the joy that filled the space. The reception took place in the church meadow, where tables groaned under the weight of contributions from the community. Eleanor had insisted on a cooperative effort, everyone bringing what they could rather than formal catering. The result was a feast that represented Dry Creek at its best. Martha Bellwether and Lucy sat with Mrs. Chen, the girl's eyes wide at the celebration. Eleanor made sure to introduce them to others, already weaving them into the network of support. That was well done, James murmured as they shared their first dance. Helping them today, I couldn't turn them away, not when I remembered being that desperate. One of many reasons I love you, he spun her gently. Though you realize our honeymoon might now include settling them in? Do you mind? Not at all. Marrying you means marrying your mission. I knew that going in, he smiled. Besides, the ranch could use a seamstress. The hands are already complaining about having to come to town for alterations. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eleanor looked around at the gathering. The Women's Cooperative members clustered together, planning their next meeting. Children played tag between the tables. Doc Hartley regaled a group with stories of Dry Creek's early days. Even former enemies seemed caught up in the spirit of celebration. Penny for your thoughts, James said. Just thinking about journeys, Eleanor replied. 2 years ago, I arrived here with nothing but debt and desperation. Now you've built something that will outlast us all. The cooperative, the connections, the hope you've given people. He pulled her closer. You've transformed this town. Eleanor Rowan. We've transformed it, she corrected. None of this would have happened without you believing in me. Judge Hale approached, dignified despite the punch in his hand. Mrs. Rowan, Mr. Rowan, I wanted to offer my congratulations and share some news. The territorial legislature is considering a law protecting women's business rights. Inspired by your cooperative, you've started something bigger than Dry Creek. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Judge Hale, I never imagined. Vision often exceeds imagination, he said kindly. You saw a need and filled it. That's how all great changes begin. As the stars emerged, the party began winding down. Eleanor and James made their rounds, thanking everyone for coming. When they reached Martha Bellwether, the woman gripped Eleanor's hands. I'll work hard, she promised. I won't let you down. I know you won't. And Martha, in 6 months, you won't be working for me. You'll be working with me. The cooperative needs leaders in every town. I think you might be perfect for Denver. Hope bloomed in Martha's eyes, the same hope Eleanor remembered feeling when James first stood up for her. The cycle continued. Each woman helped, becoming a helper in turn. Finally, as the moon rose full and bright, James lifted Eleanor into his wagon. The crowd cheered and threw flower petals as they drove away, heading for the ranch that would be Eleanor's new home. No regrets? James asked as the town lights faded behind them. None, Eleanor said firmly. I'm keeping the shop, of course, and I'll need to travel for the cooperative, but home is wherever we're together. Good answer. He pulled her close as they drove. Ready for the next chapter? With you always. The ranch house stood welcoming in the moonlight. Windows glowing with lamplight Bill and Sarah had left burning. James carried Eleanor over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, Eleanor found touches of thoughtfulness everywhere. Her sewing supplies arranged in a dedicated workspace, books she'd mentioned wanting to read, fresh flowers in every room. When did you do all this? I had help. The cooperative isn't the only group that supports each other. James smiled. Welcome home, Mrs. Rowan. Home. The word settled into Eleanor's heart like a key in a lock. Not just the house, though it was lovely. Not just the ranch, though the land stretched endlessly under stars. Home was this man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up. Home was the purpose she'd found, the community she'd built, the future stretching bright before them. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For waiting in the shadows until I was ready to see you, for being patient while I found my strength, for loving not just who I might become, but who I am right now. Eleanor, James said softly, loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. As they stood together in their new home, the past's pain transformed into the foundation for their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the cooperative to manage, the ranch to run, lives to touch and transform. But tonight was theirs, a celebration of love found in unlikely places and hearts brave enough to try again. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, no longer a lonely sound, but a reminder that even in the vast desert, no one had to be alone. The women's cooperative would ensure that. Eleanor and James would ensure that. And in years to come, when people told the story of Dry Creek's transformation, they'd remember the widow who refused to break, the rancher who chose to stand up, and the love that bloomed like wildflowers after rain, proof that even in the harshest ground, beauty could take root and flourish. The lilac bushes planted by the shop would grow tall and fragrant, their purple blooms a reminder each spring of new beginnings. Children would play in their shade, including Martha Bellwether's Lucy and the 3 sons Eleanor and James would raise. The cooperative would spread across the territory and beyond, a network of support that began with one woman's refusal to let shame define her. But all of that lay in the future, tonight, in a ranch house filled with lamplight and love. 2 people who'd thought their best days were behind them discovered they were just beginning. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. In this wild land where the sun baked the earth hard and unforgiving, where society's rules could be as harsh as nature's law. Love had found a way. Not the desperate love of youth or the comfortable love of long partnership, but something forged in adversity and chosen with open eyes, a love strong enough to transform not just two lives, but an entire community. And so, Eleanor Hayes, who came to Dry Creek as a desperate widow, became Eleanor Rowan, pillar of the community and proof that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the deepest struggles. Her story would be told for generations, inspiring other women to stand tall, fight back, and never forget that they deserved love, respect, and the chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, resilience, and triumph in the Old West. I hope Eleanor and James's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world this story is reaching and hear your thoughts about Eleanor's incredible transformation. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of courage and romance from America's frontier days. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover Eleanor's inspiring story. Your support means the world and helps keep these historical romances alive for everyone who loves tales of the human spirit triumphing against all odds.